So I've been practicing pharmacy since 1999, and there were certain things that I saw back then that really surprised me about the opioid crisis. And here's the thing. There's major changes that have happened over the past year or so that I want to bring awareness to as well. And this is a fight that's a personal fight that I have and a war that we have to have against fentanyl. And I'll tell you why and explain more in just a second. When I was practicing, when I graduated from Wayne State University School of Pharmacy, I was really excited to get out into the real world. And I remember my first year practicing, and I would get prescriptions such as Vicodin ES, which back then had 750 milligrams of acetaminophen. And I would call and question some of these prescriptions that were really being written in excess. And the response I would get oftentimes would be, well, you're a pharmacist and you could pretty much shut your mouth and fill the prescription. And this is a big shout out to all the pharmacists back then that were battling this. We were on the front lines, really battling the opioid crisis and trying to raise awareness. So a huge shout out to every pharmacist out there. A huge shout out to all the pharmacists that also battled other things with during COVID as well. We've been on the front lines for so many different things. And the opioid crisis was one of the very first things that we were personally battling. We knew that the first phase, that people were getting hooked on prescription painkillers. Drugs such as Vicodin and Norco and drugs like OxyContin in the later to mid to late 1990s fueled the opioid crisis. We then moved on to phase two in the 2000s, where people were moving from prescription painkillers onto heroin. And it was estimated that 80% of people that moved on to heroin started on prescription painkillers. That was the second phase. Then we moved on to the deadly phase of synthetic opioids, the third phase of the opioid crisis, where people were not just moving from prescription painkillers onto heroin, but then heroin was being laced with drugs such as fentanyl and carfentanil, and people using fentanyl, illicitly made fentanyl alone, and people were dying at unbelievable numbers. Here's the other thing that's happening now in the fourth phase, is it's just not about prescription drugs anymore. We have seen a drastic decrease since 2012 in the number of prescriptions dispensed. Over 100 million prescriptions less are being dispensed per year than they were in 2012. And not only the number of prescriptions that are being dispensed, the number of tablets being prescribed has drastically decreased as well. We're getting better. We're getting better on that, around that piece, around that education piece. But here's the call out, is that you literally can take out all prescription painkillers right now. And the number of people that are dying from opioid overdoses is still going to skyrocket because of the fact that fentanyl and analogs of fentanyl are wreaking havoc in society. If you look at it, the numbers that were just sent out by the DEA recently, 66% of all drug overdoses, deaths, out of 105,000 overdose deaths last year, 66% were related to fentanyl alone. Here's the other crazy statistics that people just don't know about. It's not about prescription opioids. I get it that we're still battling it. We're still want to prevent people from getting addicted in the first place. It's all about prevention. But here's the problem. 85% of all opioid overdose deaths now are related to fentanyl alone. So this thing has changed. And that's why we're entering the fourth phase. And the fourth phase really is around the combination of drugs that are people using cocaine along with heroin, along with thinking they're getting heroin, but they're getting fentanyl. And on many times, people thinking they're buying cocaine are actually getting fentanyl. Here's the other situation. People illicitly buying drugs or buying drugs on the black market and buying drugs such as thinking they're getting Xanax, they're actually getting fentanyl many times. And when fentanyl is found in these tablets, these fake tablets, 40% of the time, it is a deadly or lethal dose. Listen to this, that the number of people dying from fentanyl alone is exceeding the number of people dying from gun violence and car accidents last year. Think about that. How often do we hear about people dying from car accidents and guns? That combined, fentanyl is causing more death in this country. So that's why we have to be aware that the DEA recently put out a memo about mass overdoses, mass deaths happening because of fentanyl. They put out a memo as well advising people that one pill can kill. You don't even need to be suffering from opioid use disorder to be at risk now from having an overdose from drugs like fentanyl. That's why we need to raise awareness. Here's the other thing, is I urge people to understand what's happening with drugs like having naloxone on hand, not just Narcan, because these drugs that are available right now, these illicitly made drugs such as fentanyl that we're finding in all over the place. Many times it's taking more than just one dose of Narcan to get people out of an overdose situation. There's been a lot of advances over the past year. There's been a new version of naloxone that's available called Clexato, which is a double the dose of Narcan nasal spray. But there's also, most recently, there's an injection version, a higher dose injection version called Zimhi, Zimhi, that is now available as well. That all costs very similar to what Narcan costs as well, but that's at higher doses to get a higher peak concentration into the bloodstream because these drugs are so powerful. Worst case scenario, please, I encourage everyone to have naloxone on hand. And whatever it is that you have, please have it on hand. If you know somebody that's at risk, a friend, a family member, a coworker, I cannot tell you how important it is right now to have Narcan or naloxone or Zimhi or Clexato on hand. Because here's the problem, that calling 911 many times is going to take too long. The brain starts to die after a few minutes if they don't get a treatment such as naloxone provided to them. And if they don't breathe, if CPR is not provided, the brain could die within minutes. And by the time EMS comes or a first responder, brain, even if they do survive, many times there's so many injuries that have happened to people. I urge people to have that on hand. That fourth phase, the fourth phase of it's just not about fentanyl alone, but fentanyl oftentimes mixed with other drugs. It's wreaking havoc. The fourth phase, I really call it, of at risk of overdosing from fentanyl without even being having OUD, is the reality of where we're at today. So what can you do? Again, know the resources. Many times in Michigan, for example, people don't even know that you can get naloxone discreetly mailed to you, to your home, free of charge by going to michigan.gov/opioids. It can be sent to you from the Grand Rapids Red Project. It's a great resource. The michigan.gov/opioids website is really a great website to help get guidance and direction on where to go from help. Recently, we talked about also Families Against Narcotics opened another chapter in Oakland County. And we're excited to announce that Families Against Narcotics has this new chapter in Oakland County, one of the biggest counties in the state of Michigan, to be able to offer guidance and help to people in southeastern Michigan. So there's a lot of changes. Please know the resources that are available. Please know that we have moved into a different phase. You know, for me, it's the battle. I'm raging a war against fentanyl. And one way that we can do that is by flooding the streets with naloxone. I think it is so important right now. 105,000 people have died of drug overdoses, and almost 70% of them are because of fentanyl alone. Remember what I said, fentanyl alone now accounts for more deaths than car accidents and gun violence combined. That is really a scary situation. One pill can kill. If people think that they're taking a Xanax that they bought off the black market, thinking that it's Xanax, these tablets oftentimes look identical. And oftentimes there's fentanyl in these tablets. So I'm trying to raise awareness on what we can do differently and raising awareness about this fourth phase. So, again, we need to work together, but I can urge people enough than to have naloxone on hand more so than ever right now.